Mr. Silly Gets the Giggles by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Silly lives in a place called Nonsense Land, where the grass is blue and the trees are red, which you already know. It is also a place where zebra crossings are spotty, which you probably did not know. In Nonsense Land, you post letters in telephone boxes and you make phone calls from letter boxes. And in Nonsense Land, the umbrellas all have holes in them so that you know when it has stopped raining, which is utter nonsense, but not if your name is Mr. Silly. Now, one morning last week, Mr. Silly got up, put on his hat, brushed his teeth with soap as usual, polished his shoes with toothpaste as usual, and went down to breakfast. For his breakfast, Mr. Silly had fried eggs and custard as usual, and a cup of hot, milky marmalade as usual. After breakfast, he went out into his garden. The day before, Mr. Silly had bought a tree. But as he looked at the tree, he realized that he did not have a hole to plant it in. So he went to the hardware shop. Good morning, said Mr. Silly. I would like to buy a hole. Sorry, said the sales assistant. We're all out of holes. Sold the last one yesterday. Bother, said Mr. Silly. He decided that there was nothing for it but to go in search of a hole. He walked and walked and walked. Eventually, Mr. Silly stopped walking and looked down at his feet. That's odd, he said. The grass is green. Of course it is, said a voice behind him. Grass is always green. Who are you? Asked Mr. Silly. Little Miss Wise. I'm Mr. Silly. Could you tell me where I am? You're in Sensible Land, said Miss Wise. Mr. Silly walked so far that he walked right out of Nonsense Land. I'm looking for a hardware shop, said Mr. Silly. Can you help? Certainly, said Miss Wise. Follow me. As they walked along, Mr. Silly looked about him. He had never seen anywhere like it. The grass was green, the trees were green, even the hedges were green. They came to a zebra crossing, a stripy zebra crossing. Mr. Silly chuckled and then he giggled and he laughed out loud. Why are you laughing? Asked Miss Wise. The zebra crossing is stripy. What what else would be what else would a zebra crossing be? Said Miss Wise. Spotty, of course, said Miss Silly, wiping tears from his eyes. How silly, said Miss Wise. They set off, and further they went, the more Mr. Silly laughed. He laughed when he saw someone posting a letter in a letter box. He laughed when he saw someone using a phone in a telephone box, and he laughed when he saw an umbrella without holes in it. Eventually they came to Miss Bolt's hardware shop. Good afternoon, said Mr. Silly. I would like to buy a hole. A hole? Questioned Miss Bolt. Yes, big enough to plant a tree in, explained Mr. Silly. Miss Bolt sniggled. Miss Wise chortled, and they both burst out laughing. I've never heard anything so absurd, laughed Miss Bolt. But I do have something that may help you, though. That evening, Mr. Silly invited his friend Mr. Nonsense for supper and told him all about his day in Sensible Land. Mr. Nonsense laughed so hard that he fell off his chair. And then, continued Mr. Silly, Miss Bolt gave me a spade. A spade? Why in the world would I want to buy a spade when all I wanted was a hole? That's ridiculous, laughed Mr. Nonsense. What's for pudding? Spam roly-poly, answered Mr. Silly. Oh, goody, said Mr. Nonsense. My favourite. The end.